All right, I'd like to move on now and start getting into some additional Photoshop productivity techniques to help you move a little bit faster here inside Photoshop. And I want to start this discussion off with a look at Photoshop's history panel. Now, if you don't know what this is, I think of it as an Uber undo, if you will. You know, when you make a mistake and you want to undo the last step, this sort of thing. Well, history is like a mega version of this. So in order for me to illustrate how history works, we need to actually do something to our image. So what I'm going to do here inside Photoshop is just apply 3 very quick filter effects to our image. We'll talk about special effects and filters and all this great stuff a little bit later on. But for now, let's just kind of throw on some down and dirty filters onto our image. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to head up to the filter menu up at the top, and I'm going to head down to blur and then down to Gaussian blur, this guy right here. And as far as the settings that I want to use inside the dialog box that appears, all I want to do here, again, because this is down and dirty, is just increase my radius somewhat. Maybe, you know, something like this. I really want to blur this image, and you can see the image is getting blurred in the background. Something like that is just fine. Okay, go ahead and click on OK if you're following along. 2 more. I'm going to head back to the filter menu, down to noise, and then over to add noise. And this is going to give us sort of this noise effect. And again, I'm just going to crank up this amount here just so we see some kind of a change there inside our image, maybe something like that. So now we have almost sort of this film grain effect. Last but not least, 1 more to go here. I'm going to head back to the filter menu, and then this time I'm going to head down to pixelate and then down to mosaic. And this is going to give us sort of this pixelated effect on our image. I'm going to, once again, drag my slider towards the right to give myself some kind of a pixelated effect, something like that. Okay? And I'll go ahead and click on OK. Now, as far as history is concerned, I'm sure we're all familiar with the traditional undo and redo. For instance, I can head up to the edit menu here and I can undo the previous step. So edit and then undo mosaic, for instance, and that removes that previous step, and now I'm back to the state, if you will, of my image as it was before I applied the mosaic. Or I could go back to the edit menu and I could step forward by redoing the mosaic. Something like this. This is all built into a single keystroke command inside Photoshop, Controller Command Z on your keyboard. And what's interesting to note is that traditionally Photoshop has just 1 level of undo. Now think of this as a traditional undo, which is very different from history, and that's really what we want to take a look at here is history. So make sure that you're all the way back to your mosaic here. In other words, I can't redo, I can only undo now from the edit menu. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop into Photoshop's history panel. So what I'd like you to do is either head up to your window menu and then look for history, or look for this icon way over on the right hand side of your screen. He should be kicking around there somewhere. Okay? So this is our history panel. Now, what I'm going to do here, just for clarity's sake, is I'm just going to tear this guy away so we can sort of focus on him here on screen. Now, what's interesting to note here is that as we've been applying these filter effects to our images, the history panel has been paying attention. He's been watching us the whole time. In other words, we opened our image, and then we applied the Gaussian blur filter effect. Then we applied add noise, and then we applied mosaic. Now what I can do here is I can quite literally step back in time, for instance, by clicking on add noise, or by clicking on Gaussian blur, or by clicking all the way back on open. This is where you and I started. So how history works, as the name would imply, is we literally have a timeline for our work. The oldest steps appear at the top. The most recent events or recent effects that we've applied, in our case, appear at the bottom. And we can literally move forwards and backwards through time with the history panel. That's why the history panel is such a big deal, right? Now, there's lots to show you here. The other thing that I wanted to mention is right up at the very top of the history panel, we have what's referred to as the snapshot. And I'll talk about snapshots in a little bit more detail in just a little bit. But for now, what happens is anytime we open an image, a snapshot is created by default for us right at the very top of the history panel. So in other words, as we're moving along through our image, applying effects and creating some additional options, applying effects and settings and things like this, we can always go all the way back to how our image looked when we first opened it inside Photoshop. Here's something else that I want to show you. I'm going to go all the way back down to the most recent effect, Mosaic, and this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to head up to the Edit menu, and rather than choosing Undo or Redo as we were doing previously, now notice it wants to undo the state change because that's the last thing that we did here. We can also choose Step Backward. Now, this is the same as choosing a previous state inside the History panel. Notice I was on Mosaic, and then I can go Edit, and then Step Backward. Takes me back to Add Noise. I can go back to the Edit menu and step backward again if I want to, back to Gaussian Blur, or I can go Edit and then step forward if I want to. So I can go forwards and backwards from the Edit menu as well. And the reason why I'm showing you this from the Edit menu is because we have some really handy keyboard shortcuts that we can make use of here. So if I want to step forward using my keyboard, I would use Shift-Command-Z here on the Mac or Shift-Control-Z on the Windows side. If I want to step backward from the keyboard, on the Mac side it would be Option-Command-Z. On the Windows side it would be Alt-Control-Z. Okay? So if you want to give those keyboard shortcuts a try, go for it. Absolutely. And you can literally move forwards and backwards through your history panel from your keyboard.